Okay, this is a quick lecture on the analogy of the cave that is found in Plato's Republic, Book 7. And I added this to the syllabus a little bit after the rest of the other course content was figured out and recorded and posted and so on. But I think it's actually a really good addition to the class. First of all, it adds more Plato, and the more Plato people read, the better in general. Second, it's actually a really good way to talk about the topic of this day of class, which is class 8, comparing rhetoric to dialectic and logic. It's not exactly one-to-one correspondence of what's going on in the analogy of the cave and what's going on here, but it's actually a really good way to explain. I'm going to explain the need for rhetoric. Actually, that's kind of what's going on in the big picture of this. So you have the PDF, the reading there, and I just want to kind of make this short lecture. It's probably going to be maybe 10 minutes, explaining how I think this applies. And so let's talk about the context of the Republic. Plato's Republic is a book. Is a dialogue, and Socrates is, as he often is, the main character of this dialogue that Plato wrote. Other characters are there. Okay, I don't want to talk about the entire Republic. I teach a class on it every year, so I have too much to say about it, so I'm going to hold back. What's the point? The Republic is a book that attempts, among many other things, to define justice, to talk about what it is for somebody to be just. The word justice comes to kind of be interpreted in the Republic really in terms of virtue itself. Like, what is it to be a good, righteous, just person? Not just sort of the specific justice of how people relate to others in a kind of balanced way. It really just sort of means the goodness of the soul in general. But in order to accomplish that goal, fix the camera. In order to accomplish that goal, Socrates and the other characters decide to create a kind of image that symbolizes the soul. The image that they create is that of the city. And so the idea is, if they can describe what a just city looks like what a fair community looks like, a just community looks like, that might somehow reflect what a good or just or righteous soul looks like. And so the parts of the city kind of come to symbolize parts of the soul. And if we see a city working together, the members of the city, citizens, classes in a city working together in a fair and just way, that might be able to teach us about something about how the soul can come to become just. It's one of the best books I've ever read. It's something that I think everybody should read, or at least most people should read. It is in that context of justice in the soul, but also in the city, that by Book 7, you have the most famous part of Plato's Republic, which is the analogy of the cave. And if you did the reading, you have an idea of the sort of picture that's painted there. What's going on in the analogy of the cave? Pay attention to sort of the title. And I might be using slightly different words that are there in the translation that you read, but be a little bit flexible about that. The analogy of the cave is presented by Socrates as an image of the soul, quote, in its education and its lack of education. So the analogy of the cave, according to Socrates, who is Socrates the character in Plato's Republic, according to him, the cave analogy is about education. That's the topic of that analogy. Now, it's worth thinking about. It's kind of interesting the way Plato is writing here. Plato's the author of the Republic. Socrates is a character in the Republic. He was a real person, but we don't really have any indication that Plato is acting like he's writing down an actual conversation that Socrates had. He was a real person, but now he's being used as a character by Plato. He may have had conversations like this, but it's not really like a transcription of an actual conversation. So that means you have Socrates the character in Plato's story, writing a story. So that's interesting. It's a sort of story within a story. You have lots of that in literature. You have some of it even in philosophy. Okay. And in that story, the title of that, the sort of topic that's being presented is, this is about education. Now, what's the actual story about? What is the analogy of the cave? The analogy of the cave is human beings are stuck in a cave underground, far from the light. So no natural light seems to be able to get into this cave. And they have sort of their backs to some kind of wall. They're chained down, and it specifically says that their necks are chained so that they can't look in either direction. They can only look forward. What's in front of them is a wall. I have to remember which side I put the wall so you guys can see my hands. You have the wall on one side, across from them. They're sitting here facing this wall. Behind them and up, there's a fire. And that fire is lighting this wall that's across from them. In between the fire and where the prisoners have their backs chained, there are puppeteers. There are marching back and forth holding shadow puppets. And so the fire is hitting these puppets, and those shadows are hitting the wall. And at the same time, the puppeteers are making noises. They're putting on a show, sort of, for the people to watch. And so if somebody walks by with a horse-like puppet, they'll make a horse noise, and the people will think that that's a real horse. Why do they think that's the real horse? Because this is all they've ever known. All they've ever known is shadows projected by a fire, which is not the actual sun. So it's sort of a fake light, onto fake images. So they're shadows of fake images coming from a fake light. That's how deep into illusion most people are, according to Socrates, the character written by Plato. Okay, I really want to keep this as complex and messy as possible to show, because there's a lot of, almost everything in Plato you can kind of read in a dumb way and kind of simplify it. Plato wrote in these layers on purpose, and I don't want to take away what Plato did on purpose, because he's smarter than I am. So there you have that section of the cave. You have the prisoners. I'm going to call them prisoners. You have the people at the very bottom of the cave. All they know is these shadows. You have the puppeteers. Then the story goes on. Well, once in a while, or at some point, somebody escapes from these chains and climbs out of the cave. And it talks about how difficult and arduous that journey of climbing out is. And eventually he gets to the very outside of the cave, and he looks at actual things for the first time. He's never seen an actual horse. All he's seen is shadows of fake horses. So first on his way out, you would assume he sees the puppet horses, and he's like, okay, what's going on here? Then he keeps going, and eventually he sees a real horse. And then finally, at the very end, he sees actual sunlight. And then Socrates kind of gives bad advice. He says, well, then eventually he sees the sun itself. Please do not look directly at the sun. He's not giving you advice on, keeping your eyesight healthy. But then he says, but he sees sort of the truth itself. Okay. How is this an image for education? Well, I think the sort of climb outward is about education. That's part of it. So what is it to be educated? It means to leave behind your illusions, all the fake things that you believed were real, and to go out into the real world. But the part of the punchline of that is that process is very arduous and painful. Education is a painful thing, which by this point in the semester after listening to my lectures for this long. Education is something that is painful for the soul. It hurts. It's exercise, but just like all exercise that's beneficial, it's not comfortable. Now, at the end of the story, it says that the guy that escaped and saw the real world went back into the cave, and he tried to get his buddies out, and they rejected him. And so a part of the story is also that people don't like the truth. The truth, because it's a painful thing, they're going to either laugh at it, belittle it, or they're going to kill the person that attempts to tell the truth. And you read the analogy of the cave in light of the apology and the dialogues that are about the trial and death of Socrates. It was the city that executed Socrates, and the Republic was written after that happened. And so it's not like Plato's being prophetic. He knows that they killed the guy that was trying to tell them the truth, who was Socrates. Plato was this little kid when Socrates died. It left this very deep impression on his mind. So education, because it's painful and because it tells the truth, apart from whatever public opinion might be, being an educator can be kind of dangerous because people are going to reject what you have to say, and including the way you say it. So that's sort of the image. That's the story. We can already see how it's about education. The guy that goes back into the cave kind of takes on the role of the educator. He's rejected for that. All right. The process of education. So let's say somebody agrees to go back up with him. Oh my gosh, you're right. We're in chains. What's going on? Get me out of here. And so a couple of people, one or two people, whatever, decide to go back out. Well, now this guy, the educator, is going to have to drag or lead in a kind of semi-compulsive way almost. These people that want to see the truth, he's going to have to lead them through this painful slope going upward and out of the cave. And then their eyes are going to hurt when they see actual light for the first time. It's not just going to be a little campfire inside the cave. It's a painful thing that they're going to, and eventually, after all this pain, they're going to be like, wow, thank you for getting me out of there, even though it hurt so much. And probably I was complaining the entire time. Okay, so again, that's another thing that's part of education. Okay, awesome. I think there's a lot of cool stuff there. One way to interpret this is to read it within the context of quote-unquote Platonism with a capital P. I don't know whether Plato himself really believed. We don't know. I don't think anybody knows what Plato himself actually believed about anything, because all he wrote basically was dialogues. And you write dialogues when you kind of want to say stuff without saying stuff. So it's kind of hard to guess what Plato actually believes. But one of the ways to read this is that what's going on in the cave is the world of the senses. So the actual physical world around us, maybe one way to read what Platonism is that this world of changing beings around us is fake. It's not real. It's like the shadows that are on the wall. And for us to see the truth is to escape this world of the senses and to go to the world of ideas, these pure forms, these pure knowable ideas that are abstract. And that's kind of what education means. There might be some truth to that. I don't think it's true to say that the sensible world is not real. But are the sciences, is the truth, properly speaking, an abstract thing? Yeah, the sciences, as they're known by human intellects, scientific knowledge is always universal. And so for me to know, I am Father Andy, for Father Andy to know that there is a tree, I have like a kind of a bush outside my house. That bush is about 8 feet tall. Okay, I know a fact. That's a sensible thing and I can measure it. Okay, it's 8 feet tall. That's a fact, but that's not scientific knowledge. Scientific knowledge is for me to know the species of that bush and to know what is true about all of those bushes. It's universal. It's not particularly about that one thing. So can you sort of map that onto the cave analogy, that you're going from these individual sort of, remember, it's a fire that is projecting these moving images, their shadows onto the wall. Well, that means even the shadows on the wall are kind of like moving back and forth, because it's a flame that's projecting them. So Plato does, I think maybe it's partially correct, at least to read. Plato does see everything around us is changing, and it's hard to have a permanent knowledge of a changing world. So I think you can kind of map that on, and to go from in education means to go from knowledge of changing things to knowledge that's permanent and that's more abstract. All right, I think that's fine. What does that have to do with logic and rhetoric? Don't worry so much about dialectic. I want to talk about logic and rhetoric. Well, we already said, hopefully you saw the first lecture first before this. In that lecture, I talked about how the goal of logic is scientific knowledge. Logic has necessary premises, and it uses these necessary abstract premises to get to things that must be true. Demonstrative knowledge. That is what you do when you're outside the cave. That is what an educated person does to come to true scientific knowledge. What is the sort of analog inside the cave? What are the shadows that are just totally fake? Well, I think part of it is fake things that people care about that don't really matter. You know, what kind of shoes this celebrity wore at this award ceremony, and to sort of care about that. I don't mean to just bash fashion. You can put in all kinds of stuff into that. What this, I don't know, quarterback on this football team of this city, what his average is on some aspect of the game. Again, I'm not saying there's anything bad about caring about it. It's not like it's a sin or something like that. But like to get like invested in it and to care so much to the point where you're neglecting things that might actually be more important. Yeah, I think that's kind of caring too much about dumb stuff that's just a shadow. That who cares? Why is this important? And then, whatever. Things like that. These are sort of changeable, arbitrary, contingent things. They're a part of life. You can enjoy them for a little bit and then just enjoy them knowing that they're worthless. It's okay. There's something okay about that, what's gonna happen in the next MCU movie. You see how many levels of fake that is. Oh my gosh, are they gonna bring back I don't know, who would they bring back at this point? Is so many new characters are dead. Is Hawkeye, gonna come back in the next Avengers movie? Hawkeye's a fake character made up by a guy, played by a guy who's pretending to be this fake guy in a fake universe. If he comes back, okay, that's cool, I guess, if he's back. But like, that's the shadow stuff. I think a lot of the economy is the shadow stuff. Right now, the day I'm recording this, the stock market is like took a big hit. I have no idea what that means personally, but apparently it means something to some people. But the one thing that I know about the stock market is it is totally fake. It's a completely made up thing. And yet people are going to sort of lose their livelihoods and maybe even their life in some cases because of this totally fake thing. This is the shadow stuff. Here's the problem. As an educator, as an educated person, you want to live out in the realm of the truth, the ideas, the real world, what's real and permanent. But the people that you're speaking to are down in the cave. This is a very pessimistic viewpoint of humanity. It doesn't seem like Socrates, and maybe even Plato, think that the majority of human beings are capable of accepting the truth in its fullness. They don't think that most people can be philosophers and to go out and see the truth in all of its glory. Most people are so tied to their opinions and to their shadows and to the fake stuff they care about that if you were to go and tell them, guys, this is all stupid fake stuff, they would kill you for it. That's the picture that Socrates is painting. Maybe it's not that bleak, but maybe it is, or maybe it's kind of close to that. So what do? You want, as an educator, to tell the truth, but your audience doesn't want that truth. What do? Well, go back to the very first day of class, the consolation of philosophy. Philosophy, so we're back here in the cave. The philosophy is up here outside the cave. Knowing the truth, she goes into somebody who is feeling sorry for himself based on fate and these changeable things that are not permanent at all. And what does philosophy do for Boethius? She sings a song to him. She reads him poetry. So what can you do if you fail, or if it's not really possible to get everybody out of the cave because they insist on staying in there? What can you do? You can do your best to teach them as much as possible, even though they're stuck down there. How do you do that? Who's in the middle of the cave? The puppeteers. At the very least, you can make sure that those puppets that are projecting those shadows are as realistic as possible. That the horse puppet looks as much like a horse as possible. That the noise he's making is as horsey as it possibly can be. You know, you can't drag them out against their will. You sort of have to have willing students, but at the very least, you can make sure that the images that they're watching have some truth to them. Those puppeteers are the storytellers, the poetes, the poets. And a poet, poetry in ancient Greece, encapsulated a lot of different fine arts, what we called fine arts in the first day of class. Everything from music to storytelling, and on the very edge of it, sort of on the very edge of it, including rhetoric. And so what is it to use rhetoric? What is it to speak rhetorically, to have this art or the skill of the rhetorical speaker, of the orator? It is to be able to take the truth that is abstract and difficult to get to and kind of boring for most people, to take that truth and to relate it, to speak it in a way that the people down in the cave can digest and can understand. That's what's going on. That's what rhetoric is about. It's about speaking to the majority of people, not just to fellow philosophers. Okay? And that means the rhetorician has a very difficult job, because that means he has to know the truth, but he also has to know the people and their opinions and their language and what they care about. And so he has to sort of be stretched between these things, between the sort of philosophical life, but he also has to sort of know the language of everyday people. And it's sort of like a very brilliant, amazing thinker who can write thoughtful things or say thoughtful things about sports and about fashion and about, you know, comic book movies and stuff like that. And that's kind of a hard thing to get, because the people that are up here usually don't like this stuff, and the people that like this stuff usually don't want to be up here. And so that rhetoric is a very important, same thing with storytelling. A good storyteller understands, maybe it's at least in a kind of intuitive way, maybe not formally philosophically, but a storyteller understands very deep truths about what it is to be human, but is able to speak those truths through the stories to the people that are over here. And that means the people that are over here inside the cave get access to these deep truths about life by means of the story. So that the picture, the image that's being paraded in front of them on the screen. And by the way, it's really interesting and funny that the people stuck in the cave, they're basically in a movie theater. That's exactly what a movie theater is. They're staring at a screen, there's a light, and there's like stuff going on, you know, the projector thing, projecting onto the screen, watching a fake thing that's not actually in front of them. It's literally a movie theater. But again, the storyteller gets to this sort of really important, interesting job of telling the deep truths to the people that are sitting in that dark theater. And the rhetorician is a part of that. So that's really what rhetoric is about. And that's why I think it's a very important art for any educated person to learn. What else do I want to say about that? Rhetorician also has a slightly smaller chance of being killed than the philosopher does. What's like the deep truth of like of a comic book movie? I want you to kind of think about that. The ones that are really good, the really good stories that really capture your heart and kind of are really touching in that way. I think they are that way because they tell a truth. And every good storyteller, every good scriptwriter knows show, don't tell. You never ever should have a character in your movie say the thing that you want to say. That's not the way movies work. The way stories work in general is you sort of illustrate, you show the thing that you want to say. Rhetoricians are allowed to say it, but the way they say it can't just be this bland philosophical syllogism. And that's what we're going to be studying for the rest of the semester. But like, I don't know, the first Avengers movie, Marvel's The Avengers. What's that movie about? It's sort of about teamwork. Okay, is that a deep penetrating truth into the depths of the human soul? Not really. But is it still a kind of a nice idea to reflect on? Like, you know what? I guess I can't do this by myself. I guess it's not all about me. I guess I need to put my preferences aside and work towards a common good. That's real. That's something that's easy to forget, and it's a good thing to be reminded of. So that's kind of the way that the poets, music works in the same way. Again, music is sort of less, you know, kind of textual. There are lyrics to music, but the music itself, like just think of instrumental music, that's sort of directly hitting the emotion. So it's not really about some truth. It's about feeling a certain way. And hopefully it's about feeling the way that you should feel in a certain context. It's kind of the way the music side of things goes. But rhetoric is kind of part of that. It's about telling this truth, but in a way that appeals to the people that are down here in the cave, who are more, they make decisions more based on their emotions. So you can sort of convince somebody you should do this thing, and maybe it'll make sense, but they still feel a certain way. Again, you go back to Boethius and Lady Philosophy speaking to him. You need to get the emotions involved as well if you're going to be talking to the majority of people. Okay. All right, a little longer than I wanted, but there you go. That's a little lecture on Plato's Cave. I will see you when I see you.